Well, if you guys watched the video I did with Bill James, we had an audio disaster, but the content was really good, so I went ahead and published it. Got a lot of flames for that, so I talked Bill into reshooting. So we're going to reshoot the discussion about the engine failure on takeoff in the cold. So stick with us on Flywire. Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on Flywire, Bill James is going to come back and we're going to talk some more about his cold engine failure on takeoff here at Borland. But this time, hopefully, the audio is going to work. So,
all right. I've got a lot better stories this time.
Better stories, all right. Well, you know, any good story only has to be 10% true.
There's no good story that should be restrained by the truth.
Well, that's pretty good. So, as we did last time, let's talk a little bit about how you got into flying. How did you end up here at Borland, and how did you get into flying?
Okay. Always knew that I wanted to go into the Marine Corps, and when I did, the path just stayed open to go into the flight school, and so that all went real well. Had a really good time in the Marine Corps. I missed Vietnam 2 weeks. They crammed us through flight school, almost killed us, and then head out to Vietnam, and they diverted us to Hawaii. So my family was with me for 3 years there in Hawaii. Then went to Japan for a year, where, as you said, we were at the same time.
Yeah, we were both in Iwakuni, Japan at the same time. He was flying helicopters that I watched flying. I was an enlisted guy, you know, pounding the ground at the time, so we wouldn't have met. But
well, I'm glad we have now. So. Flew in the Marine Corps, and of course I was expecting to stay in forever, but I had an opportunity to get out, and I was looking at a flying career and get started early, so herded cattle with helicopters down in the ranches in South Texas, and also did a few other things there. We had a screwworm eradication program where the livestock in the Rio Grande Valley were being eaten, even though they weren't injured. They were just, flies were just laying, I mean, they were just covered with the eggs, the larvae, maggots. And they would take those maggots and radiate them, put them in a box, and we dropped them. And that worked exceedingly well. Had a few other flying jobs, and during that time, I realized a flying job would be great, but I wanted my own airplane. So I had bought the plans for the Very Easy in 1975 in the Marines, and here I am flying this honking huge helicopter with a million parts that fly mostly together in formation. And
most of the time.
Most of the time. I did actually have a transmission explode in Hawaii, another story, but the time came when I turned 40. We took 15 years to get the kids lined out. When I turned 40, I said, you know, yesterday I was 20, tomorrow I'm gonna be 60, I need to get started on this airplane. So I looked at, when I bought the plans, there were 300 airplanes that you could build, and when I was 40, there were like 700 airplanes you could build. So I went through all of them, and I said, you know, the Very Easy is still the one, and it still is today. And so I built that, and it changed my life. It ended up getting me a job at American Airlines and a simulator instructor, then with Northrop Grumman at Lockheed. And here I am, a lowly helicopter pilot, English major, in there with some of the best, finest fighter pilots in the world. And my job included walking the assembly line, and I watched the first nut go on the first bolt on the first F-35. And then 17 years later, we were on Holy Land tour, and I saw at 3 o'clock in the morning, I saw the F-35s go in to Syria and take out the Iranians there. The Iranians had attacked at midnight. Israel retaliated at 3 o'clock. I heard it. There were sonic booms, flares, afterburners, everything overhead. And the way I heard it, the Iranians turned their stuff on to target these guys, and the F-35s came in and got them. And the next day, the Israeli Minister of Defense talked about it and said, we've employed the F-35 in combat for the first time, and we're very happy. So that was a nice bow tie at the end of that 15 years.
Yeah.
When I built the Very Easy, the way I thought of it, it was a flying kayak with a canopy, and that's what I want. And it does that very well. Plus, I've got an autopilot now, and ruined my reputation for simplicity, but a friend bought a Very Easy, and he had a Kolb, and I saw the utility and the enjoyment he was getting out of that Kolb. So I found one, and when I got it, it had stacks of references, materials. So I went through the plans, and when I got the Very Easy going, after that 15 years, when I found the project I wanted, which was all boxes for the Very Easy, I went through my plans for 3 months. And so I already knew, I was already an expert on the Very Easy, but I refreshed it, figured out what I had. Then with the Kolb, I did the same thing. And what I was looking for, there were 2 previous annual inspections in the notebook, and they had check marks and comments. So I went through those and just looked at everything, and then I did an annual inspection. And so I became very familiar with the aircraft. Pertaining to this event, this occurrence, the one thing, even now, on my mind is 60 miles an hour. And I've got a couple of things on the Very Easy that are like that. Those are givens, and to your advantage. And so as we were climbing out, when the engine faltered, I knew I couldn't make it to the end of the runway, so I immediately turned. And the turn was not comfortable, so I pushed it over, and then I flared. And it was a wonderful feeling to have that flare and then scooting across there, and no damage to the airplane. And there was a man from Switzerland that I had met 2 hours before, and he had said, yeah, he'd like to go for a ride. So he thought that this landing was part of the ride. So we're outside the airplane, and he's taking pictures. I asked him, sir, are you okay? And he's taking pictures and stuff, and all the crash trucks are coming up, and all the neighbors, and my wife came up, and she told me later he didn't know that there was a problem.
It's just part of the ride. This is an e-ticket.
So the main thing is 60 miles an hour. Another thing, when I turned, and what I think happened was that when the engine quit, you've got this pusher high fulcrum up here, and when it stopped, the nose came up, and I caught it, and I pushed it over, and in the turn, it was not comfortable. You could say sketchy, and I felt that, and so the nose was already. I was ahead of that, and had the nose over, and I said, "That looks good right over there. I can do that. I may limp on around. We might make it back to the runway, but that looks good." And at that moment, at that instant, I knew that's where I'm going, because it was losing power. And so pushed it over, got down closer to the ground than I was comfortable with, and then flared, all within control. So I'm thinking, fly the airplane. First I was thinking 60 miles an hour, and then I'm thinking fly the airplane all the way through the emergency. And looking back on it, I was ahead because flying the Very Easy, as you know, you can raise the nose and pull back to minimal power, and it'll just fly along. And you can't raise the nose anymore. It doesn't stall. It's very stable. And the point in this situation is if you're climbing out in a very easy, long, easy, cozy, as you're climbing out, if the engine quits, you're gonna hesitate and it's gonna sag, so you're gonna go from 85, whatever you're doing, you're gonna go from 85 to like 65. And I saw an accident where the man, he was taking off, he was about 400 feet right over the runway, which means he could not have made it back to the runway. Mm-hmm. So he lost the power, and all he did was left and back. And
he tried to hold the nose up and turn left.
He was
because I don't want to get close to the ground. I don't like the ground.
And he, because of his affection for the airplane, he wanted to save it. He was trying to make it back to the runway. I had dinner with him the night before, and he had a great airplane, but he could have mushed into the trees. He could have. There was a road over there. There was a field. I don't know that he looked at those. From just watching him turn, it initially sagged, and then he was kind of sliding, and then a knife edge, and then he accelerated. And so my point was, when I turned, there was a tree line there, and I aimed to clear them. I knew I could scruff through them, but I didn't hit them. And got down and then got the nose lower than I was comfortable with, and then flared, and it was a wonderful feeling because I felt it.
You're under control.
Yeah, I'm flying the airplane.
Yeah, and I'm not going to hit anything, and life is good.
And nothing against that airplane, but that one with that engine up there, it's pushing, and so when it quits, it's going to slow down. And I think the normal routine there is you sag, and a wing breaks, a wing snaps, yeah, and you spin in.
Well, I think with the pusher behind you, and it's actually above you, it's above the center of gravity. When it quits, the pitching moment of whatever lift is still on the wing is going to pitch the nose up, not down, mm-hmm. And that's going to complicate things because it's going to slow down faster and reach the critical angle of attack much faster. So you knew that, and you dumped the nose. Your target was 60.
That was an automatic, fortunately. Yeah. Part of the fun of flying these airplanes is being prepared, and it so happens that I got ahead of it, and then when I turned, I wasn't comfortable, so I may have taken a little bit out of the turn. Anyway, it rolled right in. I can't imagine how horrible it would be to not be able to control, to not be in control of the airplane. I think about that, and I don't want to do that. And with the very easy, long, easy, cozy, if you're climbing out, if the engine quits and it sags, you need, there's a minimum speed, mm-hmm. and you determine that during your initial 40 hours, whatever, and if you pull the power back and slow down, it'll just sit there all day. The stick's already all the way back. So if you take power off, if you go to no power, you'll descend. Mm-hmm. And people have done that, like at night, and they don't know what
has blown.
But it's a good. That's better than most other options. Yeah. But you don't want to land like that. If you're at minimum speed in the easy and you add power, it just climbs. And it says in the owner's manual, it will operate normally. That's what a canard pilot should expect, and that's what you should expect with your aircraft. You should confirm while you're training that it does what it's supposed to do, and you should have that legitimate expectation. And for someone who has heard things about canard airplanes, if they build one or have one, in the normal course of events, you're going to find out that yes, it does operate normally. And it's built correctly, CG's correct, and it operates normally. And so when you determine, for example, it's interesting, with my Very Easy, if I'm by myself with a couple hours fuel, 8 or 9 gallons, as I'm at minimum speed, it's about 62, 65 miles an hour, because I'm lightly loaded. If it's me and a passenger and whatever fuel takes to get to the gross weight, it's 85.
That's a big difference.
The AOA is always the same.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have power on to hold level altitude. So what that means for the easy guys is that if you're climbing out, a fellow has tested this and provided us with the information. Whatever that minimum speed is, 62, 65, you need 22 miles an hour above that speed. So I would need, from 65 plus 22, that's 87. So I climb out at about 100. I like about 100 miles an hour. Cruise climb, I climb at about 150. One time, Claudine and I were going to Atlanta, and we were climbing out over Dallas, past Dallas, and the engine quit. And I had just on the sectional, I said, okay, there's 2 lakes and they both look like a V, and I am on that one, and it quit. Turned out that the gear on the crankshaft that times the mags and the crank, the cam, that bolt came out. And even though the AD had been done and everything. But, so I immediately climbed, I was doing 150, so I climbed up another 800, 900 feet. And then I turned to a road and glided, and I said, I'm right here, I'm going right there, Mineola. And Claudine said, what's going on? And I said, I don't know, but we're gonna stop and have breakfast and check out and see what's going on. And we glided 26 miles.
That's amazing.
So I have that sectional.
Yeah.
And I drew a 26 mile where we landed at Mineola. I drew a circle. There's 12 airports that we could have landed at. It's wonderful. And when I turned for Mineola, 100 miles an hour. The propeller was freewheeling. When I landed, after I got out, I went back to the back of the airplane and spun the prop, and it went around about 3 times. Totally unusual. Mm-hmm. So while we're flying, it's turning the crank's turning the oil pump, so I got oil pressure, so it didn't damage the engine. And as we were coming down for that 15 minutes, that's way too 26 miles, 15 minutes.
It's a long time.
You got way too much time to mess something up. I thought I was gonna have to do high key, low key, but it turned out there were 2 airports. This one, all the doors were closed and these were all open. So I said, let's go there. So I just went past the airport, 1,500 feet, 1,000 feet at base, held about 110, came in, hopped over a fence, and without brakes, rolled to a stop at about halfway down the runway. And this fella came over in a golf cart, and he didn't know that this had been a dead stick. And he said, hello, ma'am, would you like a soda? So they go down to the clubhouse.
Leave you to pull the airplane in.
And I don't believe my heart rate changed during that event because, Claudine said, well, what's going on? I said, well, we're going to land. It doesn't matter. We're going to land. And at that time, I didn't know. And every once in a while, it would cycle back into timing. So I didn't know what it was. I just made sure that I had not done it. I went through the drill of well, what could I have done wrong and what can I do now? And I don't believe my heart rate changed because at Spinks, where I had been flying out of, I flew for a long period of time, sometimes almost every day. It's a wonderful life. And I would create a component out of fiberglass, put a box on it with a light, let it cure overnight, put it on the next day, go fly, and I'd get an improvement. And I'd take that one off and set it in the box in the corner, and I'd make something else. So every week it's cooling for the oil cooler and the engine. I did gain 32 miles an hour.
Oh, that's a lot.
I have a race that I went to in 97, and at that particular race, I went 181 miles an hour. And then 2 years later, I went to the same race and I did 201. And even since then, I have progressed just by mainly watching other people. But I've done a couple of things that actually worked that were pretty fun, that have made the airplane extremely enjoyable. But with the Kolb, just knowing that one thing, the 60 miles an hour, I was ahead. I was ahead of the airplane.
Yeah, you weren't behind. You weren't struggling. You know, get 60, and then you have options from there. Not a lot of options, but you had options. Mm-hmm. That's good. One of the interesting things about that is we live in an air park, and a whole lot of the neighbors joined in, you know, to come over and help recover the airplane. And the local volunteer fire department and Crescent Volunteer Fire Department, they have a detachment here, and they were over to help.
It was exciting.
Yeah. And just put it on a trailer because the wings fold, and drug it back home.
My friends from Switzerland thought it was a lot of fun.
Well, you guys in America
and you know, everybody.
What an experience.
Everybody was happy. Everybody was happy that we were having fun. And
well, and that's the great outcome. Yeah. And you didn't have that temptation to turn back to the runway. The runway wasn't the siren call. Staying in control was.
Because of watching that event that I talked about, where he only did one, save the airplane, mm-hmm. was his priority. And I have a friend that says every day when he gets ready to leave home for work, he decides what he's going to do in traffic. When somebody cuts him off, he decides ahead of time what he's going to do. You know, go ahead. You know, he's going to. So he gets to work every day. Kind of the same thing with the airplanes. It doesn't hurt. And what you said previously about how far you go during practicing, mm-hmm. but not, you know, with the helicopters, the Marine Corps, we didn't turn the engine down. The engine was always at flight idle. It took it 8 seconds for the engine system. For example, I made hundreds of auto rotations. We literally landed without power because when we entered the auto rotation, the automatic fuel control put the engines to flight idle. And when you come to a hover at 25 feet and then you start down and you start pulling, you get down to 10 feet and you pull all the way up and then you adjust it to stay at 2 feet. Then the engine starts spooling up. So you're sitting there in a hover in this 65-foot long aircraft, and the back wheels are, 50 feet back there, and they're 2 feet off the ground, and you're sitting there for 5 or 6 or 7 seconds without power. And when the transmission blew up, I had to make a landing on a Chinaman's Hat there at Iwakuni.
That's a little island.
7 miles out.
Yeah.
When we did our practice landings there, the crew chief would lean out the door and guide us in because we only had the runway. There were no outlying fields for us to practice. So we did that occasionally out at that little island. And he would lean out and talk us in and then set us down. He said, "No, move over a little bit." And at that point, we would have 12 inches outside the landing gear. And when the transmission exploded, I turned back toward base and I saw the little island. And I called Tower and said, "I'm putting it on Chinaman's Hat." And I literally went like this, and like that. And the engines were at flight idle the whole time. And I thought we were going to slide off. There was a hill over here that the rotor blades could have hit. But I put it right there and shut it down. My heart rate did change on that. But
I should hope so.
Over the next year, I found out 4 months before this event, the same gear failed, blew out the transmission, and it came apart in the air. 4 months after mine, they got it on the ground, and the rotor blades desynced the shaft.
So they hit each other.
And they hit, and no one survived. So Chinaman's hat was a good choice.
Good choice.
I took a little heat from the maintenance people for not bringing it on back in. That was Christmas Eve. So we were going to get a Christmas tree from Hiroshima.
Yeah, it was better than having the rotors desync and hit each other and you die. You know, so what, they had to stand guard.
Yep.
To a field recovery. Anyway, that's a great story, and what I really like is that you decided this pretty much on the ground before it happened. Because, you know, frankly, I'm of the opinion that none of us are smart enough to make it up as we go along. It's better to have the training so we practice stuff, and then when the emergency happens, we've actually made the decision already what we're going to do if this happens. You what if what's going to happen, and you plan for it, and then you just execute. Because you don't have time. There's so many different variables and so many other things that are going on that you don't have time to evaluate it all and make it up right then.
Yeah,
like if you had that Chinaman's hat landing with the transmission blew up, if you hadn't practiced that a lot,
oh yeah,
then you would have been, it would have been impossible.
It was totally routine to do that. And nothing against any aircraft, but with the Kolb, when it was pushing and quit, the point is, these aircraft don't necessarily want to do what they need to do. And that's just a matter of flight configuration. And that's why you mentioned cruise climb the other day. I fly at about 150 cruise climb, and then if I was going 85, there's a very small difference in the rate of climb. It's interesting that canard on the very easy will come and bring you all the way to, say, 65 miles an hour and hold it, and then it'll descend under control, or it'll climb under control. On the very easy, the long easy, the cozy, and a Berkut. The Berkut didn't come with the canard that I have, but they put one on it, and it worked fine. The point to me there being, be careful what you modify. People modify those, and they can. And it's a good idea to think twice about that. But the airplane, it's not going to help you. You need to be prepared.
You need to be prepared and fly the plane when it happens.
I expect the engine to quit every time I take off.
That's a good plan, because then it's not a surprise. So, okay, I'm going to do this.
It took 51 years, but
better late than never. All right. So there's the story. The audio is hopefully a lot better, and I appreciate your comments. And I'm glad that Bill had a chance to get his message out, get his story out a little bit better. So, thanks.
I got one more.
One more thing.
I'm just kidding.
One more story.
I'm just kidding.
Gee whiz. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Flywire.